Hello and welcome to the first set of lectures that will cover an introduction to the human body. These sets of lectures will introduce us to some basic ideas that are extremely important for your knowledge throughout A&P 1 and A&P 2. These include just basic ideas about what anatomy means and what physiology means. It's going to include how the body is organized, how there are different levels of complexity in the human body. It's going to introduce us to terminology used to describe locations within the human body and how we compare where organs are relative to each other. We're going to go over the 11 organ systems that form the human body. We're going to go over an idea called homeostasis, which is the state of equilibrium or balance within the body. Then we're going to go over some regional terminology used to describe different locations in the body. We're going to learn planes, which are used to divide the body into sections. And then finally finish up by learning the cavities within the body that house organs. So to begin, we're going to use this table to better understand just what it means when we say anatomy and what it means when we say physiology. So what is anatomy and what is physiology? Well, simply put, you can see down at the bottom is that an anatomy is the study of structure, whereas physiology is the study of function. So structure and function is another name or another phrase that means anatomy and physiology. So we can then give some examples of each. And that's what this table does. You'll notice that we give some examples of branches of anatomy on the left-hand side and branches of physiology on the right-hand side. Now they go very well together. To be able to understand physiology and how an organ works or functions, we need to know what that organ looks like. We need to know the structure of that organ. For example, to better understand how the heart works, we need to know the anatomy of the heart. We need to know its chambers, we need to know its valves, and then we can better understand and appreciate how that heart pumps blood throughout the body. So let's look at some examples of anatomy. There's embryology and developmental biology. So these describe how the anatomy changes as an organ develops. The difference is embryology studies just the first 8 weeks of life. So from fertilization through the end of the 8th week is known as the embryonic period. So if you're studying the anatomy of that organism, we call that embryology. Developmental biology is more complete. It's the complete development of the organism from fertilization to birth, throughout life, until death. Cell biology, as the name suggests, is the study of the cell and its structures within. Histology is an important topic for us this semester, in that we're going to study the tissues of the human body. Tissues are many cells that work together. There are 4 basic tissue types. They include epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, and muscular tissue. So we will learn those and specific subsets of those tissues. Gross anatomy is the study of anatomy without the need of a microscope, so it's more of a macroscopic anatomy. We do quite a bit of that when we study bones, for example. We'll pick up bones, we'll feel the bones, and we don't need a microscope to study the structures of a bone. Systemic anatomy is just studying the specific systems, such as the nervous system, the respiratory system, and learning what organs make up those systems. For example, your brain and spinal cord, and your lungs for the respiratory system. Then there's different ways to study anatomy. You can study it regionally. You can study just the surface. You can use an instrument like a CAT scan, an MRI, or an X-ray to study the anatomy. And then finally, you can study what might happen to that organ when it's in a diseased state. An example there is studying cardiovascular disease and what happens to the heart when that disease progresses. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what anatomy is, but you can read these descriptions, and the underlying theme of anatomy is studying the structure. Physiology, on the other hand, is looking at how things work. What's the function? So neurophysiology is studying the function of the nervous system or nerve cells. Endocrinology is studying hormones. The endocrine system revolves around chemical messengers we call hormones. Cardiovascular physiology studies the heart and blood vessels. Immunology studies the body's defense mechanisms against disease-causing agents like bacteria and viruses. Respiratory physiology is learning how we breathe. How do we get oxygen and CO2 exchanged between the atmosphere and our bloodstream? Renal pertains to the kidneys, so studying how the kidney functions. And then there's some other ones like exercise physiology and pathophysiology, is the study of changes that occur with disease. So the take-home message of this entire slide is understanding what we mean by anatomy and what we mean by physiology. The next topic is understanding the fact that the human body is very complex, but it's built in what we call levels of structural organization. And each level gets more and more complex. We start at the chemical level. The chemical level involves atoms and molecules. We can actually go smaller than that as well. There are substructures that form atoms, and those are called subatomic particles. You've probably heard about the subatomic particles. They include neutrons, protons, and electrons. Neutrons are neutral. Protons are positively charged, and electrons are negatively charged. But those are subatomic. They are smaller than atoms. So we put different combinations of these together to form atoms. And atoms are known as the smallest unit of matter. Living organisms happen to have a lot of atoms, and those atoms mostly include carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. If we take many atoms, we can build molecules. Molecules can be fairly large, like DNA and carbohydrates and proteins and lipids. They can also be fairly small, like the inorganic molecules, like calcium carbonate or sodium chloride. We take the chemical level, put many molecules together to form cells. So then we reach the cellular level of organization. The cellular level includes learning the different types of cells and organelles within the cell, like the nucleus and the mitochondria. Putting cells together, you would form a tissue. The tissue level includes cells that work together to accomplish a task. For example, this is smooth muscle. It's many smooth muscle cells working together. We take many tissues to form an organ. By definition, an organ is many tissues working together. Here we have a stomach, which is an organ. It's made up of different tissues: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue. There's nervous tissue within that stomach. We take many organs, and if they work together, we can call them a system, an organ system. The stomach is part of the digestive system. Your lungs are part of your respiratory system. Your kidneys are part of your urinary system. And we put those 11 organ systems together, and they work together to form an organism. Then, if you study biology, you can even move on to more complex organizations, such as a species, or a community, or an ecosystem. And then finally, the biosphere. But we're going to stick to this realm. We're going to be studying a lot of tissues next week. We're learning a lot of organs and how they work together to form organ systems as we move forward throughout A&P1. The next video is going to pick up on this slide where we begin to learn terminology.